The sports of hurling and camogie have been granted special cultural status by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation. That's UNESCO. They've agreed to inscribe the game on the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The GAA, which worked with the Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht on the application to UNESCO, said it proudly welcomed this decision to grant the national sports of hurling and camogie this status.
The free in for Cork, where Art Foley threw himself on that ball and saved a very dangerous situation. Christie Ring to take it. Now will Christie try for the goal and put Cork into the battle? He tried the low hard shot and it's the goal! Yes, it's the goal for Cork and it's scored by Christie Ring.
Well, there's a lot of that in the archives, hours upon hours of it, from long-forgotten games. But there are also many reflective pieces, and we'll hear from them.
You understand, I like looking at ball games. I even looked when I was in the States at American football, and anybody who can look at American football must be considered to be an addict.
This is the late David Green, former professor of Irish in Trinity College in Dublin.
But I don't think American football is a very good game because there's too much physical contact in it. But on the other hand, I don't like games with no physical contact. I think soccer suffers from that in some respects. I think that the pure skill of soccer without any physical contact makes it less exciting, less interesting for the spectator. We don't want brutality, but we do want a little forcefulness now and again. And it seems to me that hurling has what is necessary, of course, skill, skills which are so instinctive that they require a lifetime to learn. This is an important thing. This pleases the spectator when he sees these skills being demonstrated, and at the same time a reasonable amount of toughness. I think these two things together make hurling the best game played on your feet that I know. I say played on your feet because I'm very fond, and I enjoyed this immensely in the States, I'm very fond of ice hockey, in which skates are interposed between your feet and the ground. And ice hockey, of course, has exactly the same ingredients, this extraordinary skill, which again has to be learned, obviously, from the very moment a child gets on the ice, and at the same time, a good deal of physical contact. So this makes hurling, I can advocate hurling simply as the best game I know. That is inside my terms of reference. And the other thing, of course, which is also another aspect of it, as well as being a ball game buff, as the Americans would say, I am also, of course, deeply interested in our historic culture. And there's very little of our historic culture left, except the Irish language and hurling. By a curious accident, as you will know, Sean, they don't flourish in the same places. Where hurling flourishes, the language doesn't, and vice versa. But nevertheless, I personally find it impossible ever to look at a good game without remembering that this has been going on for thousands of years in this country. Not, of course, in the exact form of the GAA rules, which we know are fairly recent, but nevertheless, that this particular demonstration of ancient skills isn't a thing of yesterday or the day before, but goes back as far as we know anything about the history of the Irish people. That makes it certainly the best ball game to look at for me.
The late David Green, and many more treasures from the RTE Sound Archive on the subject of hurling next Sunday.
I remember one particular Sunday there was about 150 players in the field, balls flying in all directions.
One of the best men was ever born. And one of the best men ever caught a hurley in his hand.
I remember as a child on the crossbar of my father's bicycle, travelling the long, mysterious 7-mile journey past Treeline Flood Hall, where Henry Flood once lived, on to Knocktofer, to see the legendary Lowry Mar for the first time.
And it was Sean O'Callaghan was giving the broadcast. It was September 1937. in Conlon's in Ballintaggart in Spidale. And some people were standing outside at being a tea, the able into the house. And anyway, we walked in and we went in and I saw this box. Oh, I never thought, and I thought it was the wonder of the Western world, you know, really. And the old people said, oh, nach far he's a Killarney, man down in Killarney, we can hear him here, you know.
And more on hurling and its place in Irish life next Sunday morning. Good morning and welcome to this week's programme, in which we continue our celebration of the ancient Irish game of hurling. As promised, we've been listening through the RTE sound archives to hear about the roots of hurling. This to mark UNESCO's tribute to hurling and camogie as among the important Irish contributions to world heritage. In this morning's programme, historic sources to trace hurling's beginnings, what folklore tells us, accounts by travellers in Ireland in centuries past, what the historians have to say, the role of the landlords, and some of the greats, Mick Mackey, DJ Carey, and Nick Rackard on why Christy Ring was the greatest, and how radio helped to popularise hurling in the 1930s, 40s and 50s. Later this morning, this.
Well, Ring was the greatest competitor I think I ever played against. There was no such a thing as defeat entering into Christy Ring's mind at all. There was never a thought of defeat. And this is why he was so great.
Nicky Rackard later. But first, the extraordinary role which this station played in popularising hurling all of 80 years ago and more.
The first sports event I remember is an eyewitness account of the Kilkenny Tipperary All-Ireland hurling final in Killarney.
Abbey actor Micheál O'Brien, a listener in 1937.
And it was Sean O'Callaghan was giving the broadcast. It was September 1937. In Conlon's in Ballintaggart in Spidale. I remember walking up the Boreen up to it with some farmers. I didn't know much about it, but they wanted to hear the results of the match at the time. And some people were standing outside at being a tea, the able into the house. And anyway, we walked in and it was about 7:15 or around 7 o'clock. And we went in and I saw this box.
This was what we would now call a radio. It was then called a wireless. Indeed, it was called a wireless set.
Oh, I never thought, and I thought it was the wonder of the Western world, you know, really. And the old people said, oh, far he's a Killarney, man down in Killarney, we can hear him here, you know. It was one of the old radio sets with the dry battery and a wet battery, you see, and a thing outside. I think there were only four sets in the parish at the time. The doctor or the master or the parish priest, but we wouldn't go to those houses, of course. I mean, this was an open house of kind of for everybody. Well, that was my first experience of radio, and I thought it was wonderful.
We'd be all waiting eagerly for Micheál to come on air.
Just a year or two after Micheál O'Brien's memory of that particular broadcast, a new commentator came on the airwaves, Micheál O'Hare.
And the next thing we'd hear this beautiful, cultured Irish voice, in beautiful Irish, and a few more sentences in Irish to follow.
Yes, a free in for Cork, but Art Foley threw himself on that ball and saved a very dangerous situation. Christy Ring to take it. Now will Christy try for the goal and put Cork into the battle? He tried the low, hard shot, and it's a goal! Yes, it's a goal for Cork, and it's scored by Christy Ring.
Well, my earliest memories of Micheál O'Hare is going back to about 1950, we say, when I was a young man.
Another important dimension in the history of hurling in the 20th century, and especially before rural electrification, was the growing popularity of listening to what were then something of an innovation, running commentaries on the match, heard on the radio, or as it was then known, the wireless.
We were fortunate enough to have a radio in the house, and on the Saturday before the big game, I'd have to take the wet battery and the dry battery and take it to the local creamery, which was a mile away, and to get those two batteries charged in order that everything was ready for the match on the Sunday. It would be a big match, and of course the commentator would be the great Micheál O'Hare. Now, half an hour before the match started, the crowd would gather, and they'd be everywhere. They'd be around the house, they'd be up the stairs, and if the weather was fine, the window was open, and the radio was put out in the window, volume full blast, and you'd hear that match all around the locality.
But we'd gather around the radio maybe 3:15 before the game would start at 1:30. And we'd be in the back room, and Nathan would be going on about the game and who was going to win. And then as soon as the game started, you could hear a pin drop and Balla year of Galera card, Micheál O'Hare come down. I've often thought of it as sitting down with good company, a good pint, and listening to Micheál O'Hare. We were millionaires for a couple of hours.
Hello everybody and welcome wherever you may be. Welcome to join us here in Croke Park, Dublin on this All-Ireland hurling final day. And as we come on the air, we look down on a glorious sun beating down beautifully on the Artane Boys Band, the Pipers Band, and the men from Wexford and the men from Cork marching round this crowded arena here as a preliminary to the game that could well be the game of the century.
But yes, when we do talk about those far-flung places, and that's the words he'd say about those far-flung places, and then next thing he'd rattle them off. Do you know what? He educated a lot of people too.
And so with that singing of our national anthem, we greet Gaels throughout the world, eastwards in Africa through Radio Brazzaville, and westwards through New York station WNBC, and the game is on. And the first man to break away is Christy Ring. A long shot down the field is blocked down by Willie Rackard of Wexford. He breaks away, he's held, and there's a free for Wexford 50 yards from their own goal, out in the centre of the field. Wexford defending on our left.
If one wants to be successful, like everything else, there has to be 100% dedication to the job on hand.
And elsewhere in the archives, the legendary Wexford hurler Nicky Rackard on his approach to the game.
And if you make an inter-county team, and I know in my case I always had a feeling, that not alone was I playing for myself, which was very important, self-fulfillment and self-satisfaction, but that you were responsible for the dreams and hopes of every Wexford man and woman when you went out in Croke Park. Especially when those tremendous airs like the boys of Wexford and Kelly, Killan or Boulevard would play up, the hair used to nearly stand on the back of my neck, and it was an added incentive to do the utmost to win for your county, for the honour and glory of your county.
One of the best men was ever born. And one of the best men ever caught a hurley in his hand.
Brilliant, he's the best that there is and the best that there ever will be.
Now, the compliment is not being paid to Nicky Rackard, though it could be. We're in another county and another era. We're in Kilkenny, and they're talking about DJ Carey.
In my opinion, the finest hurler I've ever seen. Without doubt, no question about it. Greatest of all time.
He's simply the best.
I would hope that whatever I would do would be right for them.
DJ Carey himself.
When you're at home poking a ball against the wall, you're 10 points down in All-Ireland final, and you want to be Eddie Kerr scoring the goals, and and I think that's great. That was great for us when we were growing up, and now it's the young fellas will be trying to emulate us, we'll say, as such, and in a few years' time there'll be someone else on the go, and they'll be the heroes.
I can remember clearly going over to the hurling field in Rathnewer.
This is Nicky Rackard again.
A field that the club would have hired out from a local farmer, and you wouldn't get room to play in the field. There could be about 100. I remember one particular Sunday there was about 150 players in the field, balls flying in all directions.
Ishe faredeg the scafferio me shide gomane lenia waun o woli an van leg o chromodo de gen sarhe shide rein tevon baide Gach branan baro lechta chawanol neshellerod Hegemot mar vewero vatan Zilen rin fini zen at your hererk Nach de tonen smeding rallo
hurling and the hurling men is very much a view from the ditch.
The beginning of Sean McRamon's documentary, The Hurling Men.
I'm not a hurling man myself, except in the sense that admiring Mozart or Picasso from afar off makes me a music or a painting man. And the comparison is fair enough. For if ever a game was an art form, then hurling surely is.
Well, it's an art, I mean, really.
And this is the great Limerick hurler, Mick Mackey.
It is an art, I suppose. Some people are born with it and some people learn. I don't know, is there any made hurlers?
That tune belongs to a song from County Louth, which we heard a verse of a few moments ago. It's called Iman Leania Wawin, one of a set of 4 East Ulster songs about matches played around the beginning of the last century.
And by that, of course, Sean McRamon means the early 1800s.
Hurling matches? Well, Iman means hurling, doesn't it? Or does it? It's been argued that in the case of 3 of these games anyway, it actually means football. And well, later on we'll be hearing how hurling can mean a dance. My point is that when an amateur starts dabbling in hurling history, he's liable to get his fingers burned, because until now there's been no really solid research published. However, that'll soon be remedied on the double, as 2 scholars are bringing out books on the subject in the near future, Brother O'Conney of the Irish Christian Brothers and Arto Milfowl. I'm referring, of course, not just to the recent history of the game since the founding of the GAA, but to the long, long story of its evolution and development, its ups and downs in popularity and status, from prehistoric times down to the 19th century. Long though that history is, however, we've to come down to the very end of the 17th century for our first full and reliable description of hurling. It's by a London bookseller of all people. He was called John Dunton. Not the friendliest of visitors to Ireland. He wrote of his experiences here in a series of letters under the title Taigland, or A Merry Ramble to the Wide Irish. But we'll forgive him a lot, because in the year 1699 he went to at least one hurling match, probably at Naas, and wrote home about it.
One exercise they use much is their hurling, which has something in it not unlike the play called Mal. When their cows are casting their hair, they pull it off their backs, and with their hands work it into large balls which will grow very hard. This ball they use at the hurlings, which they strike with a stick called come on, about 3.5 feet long in the handle. At the lower end it is crooked and about 3 inches broad. And on this broad part you may sometimes see one of the gamesters carry the ball, tossing it for 40 or 50 yards in spite of all the adverse players. And when he is like to lose it, he generally gives it a great stroke to drive it towards the goal. Sometimes if he misses blow at the ball, he knocks one of the opposers down, at which no resentment is to be shown. They seldom come off without broken heads or shins, in which they glory very much. At this sport, sometimes one parish or barony challenges another. They pick out 10, 12 or 20 players of a side, and the prize is generally a barrel or 2 of ale, which is brought into the field and drunk off by the victors on the spot, though the vanquished are not without a share of it too. This commonly is upon some very large plain, the barer of grass the better, and the goals are 200 or 300 yards one from the other, and whichever party drives the ball beyond the other's goal wins the day. Their champions are of the younger and most active among them, and their kindred and mistresses are frequently spectators of their address. 2 or 3 bagpipes attend the conquerors at the barrel's head, and then play them out of the field. At some of these meetings, 2,000 have been present together. They do not play often at football, only in a small territory called Fingal, near Dublin.
I do not think that it is an account of a hurling match, a single match.
One of the scholars mentioned by Sean McRamon, Brother Nicholas Canny.
I think it is an account of hurling as he knew it at the time. He uses the word come on, which he spells, as far as I recall, Comaan. Come on, obviously a southern pronunciation. And he has an account of a bouncing ball, what used to be referred to as a bouncing ball or the elastic ball, which is to be distinguished from the wooden ball, which did not bounce, of course, which was common in Northern Ireland, in Scotland, and in Britain generally.
This brings us to the question of, was there more than one kind of hurling as there was more than one kind of ball?
Now, you will have, I think at this stage, we'll have to be satisfied to remember that virtually every village in Britain, and of course in this country, had its form of hurling. I would call them manifestations of the stick and ball game. And it was only over the course of centuries that certain forces came in and brought all these various local ways together and harmonized them into a fixed form of playing. I would think, for my own part, that the landlord class did that in this country. Now, if you go to Britain, you'll find, at the very least, I think, 10 different titles for what we would nowadays call hockey. There were at least 10 different titles for it, and we had a number of titles for it in this country as well, of course, for hurling. One of these was Commonacht, the other was Emoint and Boyd and so on. But I think myself that the landlord class drew these together, and certainly for our major games did in fact give us one fixed type of game.
Now when you say the word landlord class, then you're talking mostly about the 18th century.
I am talking virtually entirely about the 18th century, yes. As early as 1708, the first account that I know of a hurling match appears in a Dublin newspaper, which of course would be a very tiny newspaper by our standards, called the Dublin Flying Post. This was a match played in the Curragh of Kildare between the men north of the Liffey and south of the Liffey, and I think, offhand, the number of men playing was either 27 men aside or 30 men aside.
A few weeks ago, there was a grand match of hurling at Crumlin Commons between the provinces of Leinster and Munster, in which the former came off victorious. In consequence of this, last Tuesday, May the 31st, a chosen set from Munster engaged an equal number of their conquerors at the same exercise and made their utmost efforts to retrieve their honour, but all to no purpose. For Leinster, after about an hour's struggle, gained a complete victory. Southern powers in vain 'gainst East unite. The South is doomed to tread the northern flight. Gallia to Britain quits the glorious field. To Leinster, Munster ever forced to yield.
Sean McRamon's documentary, The Hurling Men, paid great attention to the history of hurling, to its deep roots in the Irish past.
Indeed, had it not been for the Gaelic Athletic Association, the end of the 19th century might well have seen the end of hurling, a game which had survived invasion, depopulation and plantation, the Statute of Kilkenny and other colonial enactments, a game which belongs to the Irish folk memory and to our immemorial tradition, a game celebrated in the Táin's account of the youthful deeds of Cuchulainn, and again is celebrated in the stories of Fionn and the Fianna.
After they had divided their forces, the ball was thrown into the middle of the field, and a stroke was struck on it in the air, and it was not let touch the ground, flying with strong blows of powerful heroes, until it reached Diarmuid, and he struck a stroke on it into the air that put it out of sight, and the second stroke put it 2/3 of the hurling plane. And when it was coming down again, he struck it the third stroke that put it out through the mouth of the goal. The second goal was then played, and Diarmuid remained inactive until he saw the men of King Cormac winning. And when he saw that, Diarmuid went out amongst the Fenians, and with 3 forward rushes sent the ball through the goal as he had done at first.
The old stories are, of course, imaginatively wrought and embroidered. Still, Brother O'Cahony warns us against confusing Ábhéal with Áféis. The old texts have much to tell us about hurling.
And when you move back to the Táin and the Shanachas Mór and the very old texts, you are faced with what would appear to be 2 games, Cluiche na Luibe, or sometimes called the game of the loop, agus Cluiche an Fuil, sometimes called the game of the hole, and mistakenly regarded as golf, because there is no earthly question that the game, whatever it is not golf. Now, I believe that Cluiche na Luibe, the game of the loop, refers here, undoubtedly I think, to the willow sally, the sally rod that was driven into the ground like a yew nail and was approximately 3 feet wide. This was the goal. No man stood between in that short space, and you could score coming down the field towards it or from the rear. And it's only when you bear this in mind that some of the older texts begin to make sense.
And next from the archives, Leo Houlihan remembering and speaking for generations of small children. Leo Houlihan remembering how he got to his first important hurling match.
I remember as a child on the crossbar of my father's bicycle, travelling the long, mysterious 7-mile journey past Treeline Flood Hall where Henry Flood once lived, on to Knocktofer to see the legendary Lowry Mar for the first time, an initiation, a ritual of tradition. It's as if it were only yesterday that I was peering through a forest of legs, straining for a glimpse of the tall man, all bone and pies, balancing for the swing with a peculiar backward sway. He appeared to be at his graceful best despite the frantic efforts of a dark 18-year-old youth down from Carrickshock. Then someone said, "He's beating Lowry." And sure enough he was. For shortly afterwards, the youth I had seen, the new folk hero emerging to challenge the reigning champion, Jimmy Welch from Carrickshock, was to win his first All-Ireland. I recall the adolescent years at St. Kieran's, one of the schools, St. Flannan's, St. Peter's, St. Finbarr's, St. Coleman's or others, where hurling is part of the social structure, an element of culture, an art to be observed, practiced, revered. The vision of one autumn day comes back to me of a huge young lad from Wexford, new to the school, pushing the other aspirant hurlers aside with great strength and landing the ball over the town wall again and again. Nick Rackard's career had begun.
Ah, what a charm, stronger than the sweetest Irish melody can throw over me now, had the heavy, stunning sound of the hurley as it met the ball. On rushed the parties like the wind, one to speed it to the goal near the fence of the field on that side, the other to arrest its progress and send it back. A fleet runner of the adverse party, getting an advantage of 3 seconds, inserts the shovel end of his implement under the weighty mass, tosses it upright in the air, and meeting it with a vigorous sweep, he sends it flying back over the heads of the mingled forces. Then sets the confused tide backward as fleet as it came, with the exception of a few who may be considered as the corps de reserve, and whose business it is to guard the neighbourhood of the fatal wicket, through which, if the missive once rushes, the day is lost.
Still, Wexford man Nick Rackard gives the palm for hurling in his day to the Cork man Christy Ring.
Well, Ring was the greatest competitor I think I ever played against. There was no such a thing as defeat entering into Christy Ring's mind at all. There was never a thought of defeat. And this is why he was so great. And you combine that attitude of mind with the ability to hit the ball no matter what way it came, and you couldn't just beat the man. And this is why he was so great. Whereas some of us less mortals, you know, that we'd lose our nerve or something would go wrong and it'd throw us off our game. But if he made a mistake, it was an extra effort to come back to, you know, to rectify that mistake the next time and to, you know, to benefit from it. I don't think I was a great hurler in the true sense of the word. There would be no comparison between myself and Ring as regards hurling ability. But there was a tremendous comparison between us in the determination to win. I had the same quality as Ring as regards determination to win.
And another of the legendary hurlers, Mick Mackey of Limerick.
The whole thing about it, what you win in hurling, you win 1/15 of it anyway. No matter what way it goes, no matter how good you are, you have to have 14 with you.
It's not a game for a single man.
No, well, no, really, and you can't be selfish in it. If you are selfish in it, well, you won't be long. They won't be long finding you out, really. But you must have the 15, and you must have cooperation. And I mean, when we were playing together, I think we were so used to one another that we knew where we used to be, like on the field. If you were going to pass it, you needn't look around at all. You'd say he'll be there. That's the way you'd look at it.
Is the game in the air or on the ground, Mick?
Well, it is really the all-stay ground hurling, but there's a terrible lot of overhead play too. In our time there was beautiful strikers, Timmy Ryan and those fellas, doubling on a ball in there. A high ball coming along. They'd never missed. Well, if they did miss, to be surprised, really. We'd be surprised. But I think the game has changed as regards defenders, really. They're clearing some defenders now. Most of them handle the ball now.
And for very knowledgeable listeners, just remember when Mick Mackey is using the word now, he's talking about all of 70 years ago.
Centre half-backs handling the ball. When they should be hitting it away in there. Really, I think it has changed that much. There's another thing, though, which grieves me is a fella coming out with a ball and you have no way of stopping him, only meet him with a body charge. And if you do that now, whistle. Free.
This is a change, isn't it?
Yes. And I don't agree with it.
I don't agree with it.
You can't let him out,
yes.
At least. Well, I wouldn't let him out anyway. Whether to be free or not. But if you hit him a good fair belt now, whistle. There's times that annoys me at matches, and I don't get excited at matches, really. I don't get excited.
What's your biggest thrill? What gives you the most excitement at a game, Mac? Now looking.
Well, I love a good, hard, tight game, where they're hurling hard, where there isn't any dirty play in it, and where every man is trying his best.
Now, different shouts from all sides rend the sky. Glory to one, to t'other, dangers nigh. With greatest speed, the goal they crowd around, where scarce 3 standing men are to be found. In dread confusion heaped upon the plain, they stretch each sinew, swelled up every vein. These won't retire, the others can't advance. So, when Patroclus fell by Hector's lance, the battle thickened for his arms divine, and close around the Greeks and Trojans climb. One undistinguished heap they quickly made, and hero upon hero close were laid. At length, Patroclus' arms were borne away, which closed the actions of that well-fought day. Thus, by an effort, was the goal put out. Instant the ear is deaded by a shout. Hats, wigs, shoes, stockings quickly fly in air. The victors to the beer barrel repair, where huntsmen-like the game's played o'er again, and bagpipes drone, while all rejoice in twain.
This morning's programme was based on original programmes by Colin Keane, Micheál O'Hare, Micheál O'Brien, Ian Corr, Sean O'Sheacoin, Tony O'Riordan, Donncha Dooling, Nicky Rackard, Mick Mackey, DJ Carey and Sean McRaman. More voices from the archives at the same time on Sunday morning next. Thank you for listening this morning and good morning.
That programme was presented and produced